Hello and welcome to this webinar on to be or not to be a neurodiversity affirming educational organisation. This webinar is based on my MBA dissertation, where I looked at how disabling environments can actually construct barriers to strategic advantage. So it's not just about how environments can be disabling for neurodivergent employees, but also how by disabling neurodivergent employees, you're actually restricting your organization's strategic advantage. And there was three key areas that kind of came out of it, which is what I'm going to be exploring in this webinar. The first one is around perceptions of disability. I'll be talking about the medical model of disability and the social model of disability. There's also the perceptions around strategy, and this is where I would talk about how an organization views competition and also about the different levels of strategic management and representation at those levels and how that can affect inclusion. And also the perceptions around how teams work, team functionalities, and in particular, I'll be talking about reductionism and systems thinking. And what this will lead towards then is at the end, hopefully give you an idea to sort of really think about um, how does the organization view inclusion, or is it actually set up for integration? Because I'm a firm believer that if it's inclusive, if it's an inclusive environment of all neurodivergent employees as well as neurotypical, then that will in turn then improve the prospects for children and young people, because there'll be a lived experience knowledge from neurodivergent staff that would then um, be able to be tapped into. So a little bit about me to start off with. I identify as neurodivergent. I'm formally diagnosed as dyslexic and autistic. I'm currently exploring ADHD and also complex PTSD, which is a result of my daughter's passing 14 years ago. I'm a neurodiversity advocate. I am a working educational professional, so I'm in the field, I'm doing the job, and I'm also a doctoral research student at Oxford Brookes University. And my research area is about impact of educational leadership and management practice on neurodivergent educators, in particular around identity formation. And I've worked in quite a number of different phases. As after my daughter's passing, I went into quite a state of flux, as you can imagine. But this, if I try and put a positive light on this, it's allowed me to experience what different phases and different areas of education feels like and looks like and how it works. So I've worked in mainstream secondaries, I've worked in a mainstream middle school in a three-tier system. I have worked in special education. I have worked in further education. So I've had quite a good um, experience around different phases. And this is why I consolidated all this experience towards doing an MBA. So, like I said earlier, this presentation is based upon my findings from the MBA dissertation. So, the first perception I want to look at is the perception of disability. So, there's two main models. The first one is the medical model view. And the medical model view of disability sees disabilities as medical conditions that must be cured or fixed. So, an individual is disabled by their condition. So it's very individualized, it's very central around the individual themselves. Whereas the social model view of disability recognizes that disability is not an inherent trait of an individual, but rather a result of societal barriers and discrimination. So an individual is disabled by their environment. So if we use a physical disability example here, a wheelchair user is a highly skilled employee, and they need to get to work, which are at the top of those steps. So the medical model view will be considering that this person is in a wheelchair because of their medical condition, or they cannot get to work because of their medical condition. Whereas the social model view will be thinking that this person cannot get to work because they cannot access getting to work. There's a societal, but there is a barrier in the way, which is the steps. So it's depersonalizing it in a sense and looking at what what around the individual needs to change so that that individual is no longer disabled from being able to access their work. And this is the physical disability example is a good place to start in really thinking about this, because it's an example of where this highly skilled employee cannot actually access the work, which then restricts the opportunity for strategic advantage for the organization, because that person can't get there to do the job. So the social model view will be thinking about, well, how can I remove these barriers? How can we sort this out so then everybody can actually access the job and be able to perform? Now, the thing is with physical disabilities, it's very clear in front of you, like this picture is. But how do you consider it for neurodivergence? Because the medical model view will think that an individual who is neurodivergent is disabled because they are neurodivergent. Whereas the social model view will be thinking more about that person's accessibility. What is the barrier for them to be able to do their work? And quite often sits around social constructs. Now, there's a big difference between social constructs being a barrier and stairs being a barrier, because one you can see and it's clear, whereas the other is not clear. You can't see social constructs. But what you can do is understand what those constructs are and how that is impacting on neurodivergent individuals. So it is policies, practices, communication differences, all these things that are constructed by often the neuromajority. If we look at this diagram about what does the medical model perspective do? If we have a team here, there is a team there that's neurotypical. And quite often the social constructs, so policies, practices, leadership styles, communication differences, and so on, tend to be set around that neuromajority. Then you will have your employees who are neurodivergent, or neurodivergent employees, should I say. And they don't fit these social structures that are in place. So what tends to happen is that the discussions around reasonable adjustment tend to then be about fixing the individual into those environments. Now, not only does all those red arrows signify work that needs to be done by an organization, and if you multiply that by an organization of 100 people, for example, what's happening is there's such emphasis on trying to fix the neurodivergent individuals into that neuronormative environment that these skills, these highly enhanced skills, are not being looked at. So by applying the medical model of disability, they're ignoring and undervaluing and underutilizing neurodivergent educators. But also focusing on the challenges only does actually present some danger to psychological safety for neurodivergent individuals, that it's them that needs to fit into these environments. Now, in contrast, we look at the social model of disability, and we've got our team here, our workforce, neurotypicals, neurodivergent, all areas, etc. By actually reviewing your social structures, everybody can benefit. So that means that everybody is treated as equal, and you are embracing the skill sets of the whole workforce, whilst also making sure that all the challenges and difficulties are accommodated for. So the social structures around your workforce is really important to look at for the social model disability. So if we went back to the wheelchair example, by having a ramp there for the person in a wheelchair that uses a wheelchair, having a ramp, everybody can use that ramp. It's not exclusive to somebody in a wheelchair. Everybody can walk up the ramp. So everybody is equally able to access the work and do a great job. So just to summarize, for perception of disability, the medical model view, reasonable adjustments can be focused on fixing or correcting neurodivergent educators to integrate into the fixed working environment, does not concern itself with the individual strengths of neurodivergent educators, and it does encourage us versus them philosophy, because the neurodivergent educators are being focused upon as they need fixing, whereas neurotypical educators will fit within the social structure. So the next thing I want to look at is the social model of disability, focused on how the workplace environment disables their neurodivergent educators. And that means not just sensory side of things, but also communication differences and and workload as well. Encouraging reasonable adjustments to remove barriers to participation. And quite often, when barriers have been removed, it benefits everybody or it doesn't affect everybody, and everybody wins. So the next thing to look at is perceptions around strategy. So using Harvard Business School's interpretation of what a perception of strategy, they were talking about competing to be the best and competing to be unique. So competing to best is about being number one, being the best, focused on the market share. So just that particular area. Serve the best customer with the best product and compete by imitation. Just imitation, copy, 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 and just do it better. It's generally known as a zero-sum strategy. Nobody wins. So if I use a diagram here, there's a field, that's a market, and all these organizations are all competing to be the best in that small area of the market. So competing to be unique has higher returns, focus on profits, or in our case, outcomes, meets the diverse needs of target customers, and competes by innovation. So what that means is that when there is a crowd in a particular area, it means that someone can do something different and occupy a different space in that area. So they have that unique hold on a place in that market that nobody else is holding on to. Now, we take another example from this in real life right now in the music world. I'm a Linkin Park fan, and I'm delighted that they've returned. And they've done something that is incredibly interesting. They, unfortunately, their vocalist, Chester Bennington, ended his life some years ago. And was a massively talented vocalist, really was. And what Linkin Park have done is that they obviously need to have a vocalist as part of their band so they can move forward. But they didn't choose a male vocalist, they chose a female vocalist. If they chose a male vocalist, without doubt, he would have been compared to Chester Bennington constantly, constantly. And then they'll have that conversation about who was the best, which would not be a good strategic move for Linkin Park. But they chose a female vocalist who's very talented. And as a female vocalist, she cannot really be compared to Chester Bennington. So what they've done is they've changed their direction. They've decided to go down the being unique approach. It's new music with a new sound. So that's an example of how a strategy about competing to be unique is really important. Because also, from a neurodivergence point of view, one thing that is incredible about neurodiversity when embraced is that the innovation can be generated, which also allows an organization to be unique. And that innovation can come from the lived experience of your neurodivergent educators. So the next thing about strategy is the different levels of strategic management and representation. And it does look at something like this. So you have your corporate level at the top. So that's your governors, SLT, as an example. You've got your business unit level, which tend to be your middle leadership and maybe the assistant head teachers. And then you've got your operational level, which are your teachers, TAs, everybody that's working at the ground level. And neurodivergent representation across the board in lots of organizations has generally been a pyramid. So there's less representation in the corporate level than there would be in the operational level. And corporate level, they set the strategy. They set the whole organizational strategy. Now, if there's an inclusion strategy and there's a lack of representation in the corporate level, there's a risk of being run that strategies being created are based on a lack of knowledge of neurodivergence, as an example. And this is why neurodiversity training is essential when it comes to developing strategy and a full understanding. But what I also picked up in my dissertation was that actually quite often your operational level have a lot of solutions to some of the barriers that emerge in the corporate strategy. And it's worth listening to those emergent strategies. And that can only strengthen the corporate strategy, as well as giving your operational level and your business unit level that greater sense of involvement in that strategy formation. So really it's about knowledge sharing. It's about how do you raise the knowledge of the lived experience of being a neurodivergent individual to the corporate strategy. So to summarize with perceptions of strategy, you've got the competition to be the best, can prioritize competition over collaboration, driven by being the best at one thing, driven by imitation, and unique perspectives can often be dismissed. And then you've got competing to be unique. It's driven by innovation and creativity management, values unique perspectives as opportunities for innovation. Organizations can offer a unique or evolved approach to education and encourage collaboration on innovative projects. And then the third thing now is the perception of team functionality. So how do we think about the way a team works? Well, I'm going to talk about firstly reductionist thinking, which considers only the individual elements within a whole. So if you think of it from a workforce perspective, it's as a leader, you see your staff as individuals, full stop, not considering how individuals work together and interact. So yeah, there you go. There's a visual representation for it. So you have got your working environment. You've got 5 members of staff there, 3 neurotypical and 2 of them are neurodivergent, but you only see them as individuals. Whereas systems thinking considers the whole by paying close attention to the interactions between the elements within the whole. So it means within the same environment is looking at how each of these people interact with one another. And this is where neurodivergence and systems thinking work together, because when you think of aspects and social structures and barriers that are invisible, such as communication differences, etc., looking at the interactions gives you an idea as to what challenges there are, what strengths there are there particular combinations of individuals that work very well together, are there some barriers to communication, and so on. And if I think about systems thinking in action, I watched the England Lionesses last year play against Brazil at Wembley, and I do like sitting in these kind of seatings because I can see a flow of systems moving up and down the pitch, and it's really quite nice. So this was a photograph I took, and you see the Lionesses are in white, Brazil are in yellow, and you've got your different positions with different skill sets. So you have your defensive-minded players, the ones that are preventing a goal being scored past them. You have your transitional players, your midfielders, who are the ones that help transition between defence to attack and attack to defence. And then you've also got your strikers. There is another striker off the screen, but then you've got the person who is skilled to score goals. So you wouldn't put your skilled goal scorer in goal, for example, because that's not the skill set that they have. They have very different skill sets. So you can look at all these individually and think, well, those people there in the red need to improve, need to work on their defensive skill sets. And then you've got the ambers, you're thinking they've got to think about their transitions between play and so on. And then you've got your green dot there thinking they just need to keep scoring goals. The thing is, that doesn't tell us anything else. Systems thinking, on the other hand, actually gives us a very different perception. If we look at how the players interlink with each other, so a defensive player with a defensive player, a transition between the defensive player and the midfield player, and then again the transition between midfield and attack. And you can see the blue lines is kind of like their passing lanes, if you like, but they've got to all know each other very, very well to know where they're going to be. Now, this is elite level football, and so the opposition role is to disrupt those systems, which Brazil, as you can see, do quite well because they are blocking a lot of these lines of all these passing lanes. all these interactions. They are blocking these. So it's forcing the England players to have to rethink their shape. So systems are dynamic. They keep moving, and you have to keep moving based on what's happening in front of you. But what is actually the focus is not just on individual skill, but it's also how do those players interact. If two highly skilled players cannot connect very well, then the work has to be done on the connection, and that's what gets missed when reductionist thinking is applied. So reductionist thinking considers the workforce as only being the sum of its parts. Only workforces on each individual, only focuses on each individual within the workforce independent of one another. And then you've got the systems thinking focuses on the interactions between all staff within the workforce, favors team functionality, and encourages collaboration. So with these summaries, what we could do is actually, if we collect these together, and let's take the top row to start off with. So we have our reductionist thinking, considers the workforce as only being the sum of its parts, only focus on each individual within the workforce independent of one another, can prioritize competition over collaboration, driven by being the best at one thing, driven by imitation, unique perspectives can often be dismissed, reasonable adjustments can be focused on fixing or correcting, and then a neurodivergent educator to integrate into a fixed working environment, does not concern itself with individual strength or ND educators, and encouraging us versus them philosophy. They kind of imply integration, an integration mindset to mix with and join society or a group of people, often changing to suit their way of life, habits, and customs. So neurodivergent individuals often having to change their way of working, and therefore implies that they could be disabled from being able to do that. I do often wonder how many teachers who are leaving the profession are neurodivergent. So let's look at the other contrast. If we look at the other half, systems thinking focuses on the interactions between all staff within the workforce, favors team functionality and encourages collaboration, driven by innovation and creativity management, values unique perspectives as opportunities for innovation. Organizations can offer a unique or evolved approach to education, encourages collaboration on innovative projects. And the social model of inclusion focused on how the workplace environment disables their neurodivergent educators, encourage reasonable adjustments to remove barriers to participation, and barriers being removed often benefit everyone. This is a good implication of inclusion. So the idea that everyone should be able to use the same facilities, take part in the same activities, and enjoy the same experiences, including people who have a disability or other disadvantage. So we can actually look at different ways of trying to show whether that there is an environment that is focused on integration, or is it actually an inclusive environment? Is it focused on inclusion? And hopefully this toolkit will allow leaders and managers to really sort of think about where their organization culture is positioned. Now, there are other aspects, of course, that can influence this, such as leadership styles and so on. And this is not a tool that is going to answer all questions, but it's designed to at least challenge thinking around three key areas that that can show a difference between what is integration and what is inclusion. And so it's worth having a look and having a think about this. And if anybody would like to talk a bit more about it, then please do get in touch, and I can be contacted on LinkedIn, and I can also be contacted on my email address below. And I hope that you found this webinar insightful and thought-provoking. And thank you very much for listening in.